Good morning, and welcome to this class of Life and Work of Jesus Christ according to 4 Gospels in the New Testament. So we are in our 9th week. After this one, we have just one more week to go, and we'll be closing our class next week. So let's go into these lessons. So to look at the bigger picture of this class again, this is a study about Jesus of Nazareth. Main question to address is, who is he? What is he? What did he do? And how did it do it? And more importantly, why would he do those things or say those things? And to study Jesus, the character and the person and historical Jesus, there are not that much material available except these 4 Gospels, where Christians believe it to be true and official and formal. And there are some outside documents and in a very pseudo-scriptural form, like a Gospel of Thomas is a good example. And then there are some records by secular historians of the time, which isn't that much. So it is proper for us as believers to study these 4 Gospels to understand, to investigate, and to know Jesus of Nazareth. And second point is that it is in the form of narratives, and there are several ways of doing a narrative study. You can just read it, or you can meditate on it, or you can memorize it, and you can do the group Bible study using some of the teaching materials. But in this class, we had decided to do it in a very inductive way with an open-end question. Who is Jesus? And we ask questions before we determine the answers. And however, the main theme, the thrust of 4 Gospels, the theme is this: Jesus is the Messiah. Is the Messiah, and he came and lived to start and begin his kingdom, his culture, his dominance, his dominion, and so on. So it is very clear in the Gospel that the authors, 4 different authors, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, even though John has a little different perspective than other 3, still the theme is the same. Even though audience, they are targeting for reading of the material may be may be different, but yet all four different gospels say and try to say this Jesus is indeed the Son of God, the Messiah that we have been promised for years and years since the beginning of human history. And he is here to make us believe and to save and to become the king, the Lord of his kingdom. And as we believe in him and become believers, that will validate and legalize you and me as a citizen of the citizen of that kingdom. So that will be the main big frame and picture of this class, and this is where we stopped last week. Before we go into these subjects, you want to remember this. These are the main items or the questions that you want to ask to have an inductive study of narratives. So if you're studying this Bible stories, these are the main questions that you would like to ask. And there's 7 W and 1 H. H being how, and the W would be who, where, when and where, or where and when. And who, to whom. Then why, and the wherefore. So there's 2 more W's than the usual 5W1H any storytelling or doing a study of story. So to whom, who to whom, and then wherefore, whom and wherefore are added to when, where, why, what. And so first one is who. Because the main thing in the story, when you're studying the story, there are 2 elements that you are trying to understand other than these questions. One pillar or one item would be the character, and the other one would be the episode. So you want to understand the episode of the story, and also want to understand the characters. So the character is the main thing of any stories or any narratives. So like we did last week, when you ask question of who, it starts with what does the name or names mean. So in a particular story, usually in the gospel narratives, many times there is only Jesus is mentioned. Others are mentioned as either disciple or disciples, or just he or she. But in some stories, these particular names appear. Like I told you last week, for example, other than the names of 12 disciples, there are names like Nicodemus, Zacchaeus, Mary, the Magdalene Mary, and so on, or Nazareth. These are the names that are mentioned in the gospel stories other than Jesus and the disciples. When these names appear, you'd like to know the meaning or meanings of these names. it is important. Usually these names are associated with the theme or the episode of the story. So knowing the name and the meaning of the name will help you to understand the story. Even though those names of the disciples also do have meanings, just like those who are who are able to write their names in Chinese characters, we do have assigned meanings to each character. For example, Peter means the rock, big stone. Then where these characters, he or she, came from originally, where their hometowns are, that also have some implications. And who are the related characters? Because no character in the story of gospel will stand by himself or herself. So that will be the things that you want to know. And sometimes you need to draw these relation map to each character. Sometimes it's not that simple. Usually it is pretty simple, but write who's who by marking the relationship. For example, there's among the disciples, there's Andrew and Peter. And Andrew and Peter are related. They are brothers. And so one is younger, one is older brother. So we know that the relationship. And we know how Peter was introduced to Jesus by Andrew. So Andrew was the first one who came across Jesus, and he introduced Jesus to his brother Peter. So that helps you to understand the dynamic of the story, the relationships, and why he or she does certain things. Okay. Next will be next, who. We're continuing this idea of who in trying to understand the biblical narrative. So, what is his or her, the character's age, the gender, he or she, and then the rank. Sometimes the rank kind of helps us to understand the story better. And the position, it says priest or scribe, or the leader of the synagogue, or the captain of 100 soldiers, the Roman soldiers. These are the things that will help you to understand the story. And the job. Sometimes it does tell you what their job is. For example, Peter was a fisherman. And many of these 12 disciples are, by profession, they are fishermen. And that means when you're a fisherman, they didn't go to school, they have a very minimal education. But usually, even those farmers and fishermen in the time of Jesus were able to read and write. So that wasn't like they didn't have no education, but at least be able to read and write, because they need to read and understand the Bible. So it was kind of mandatory for them to be able to read. At the time, it was the Greek. They were able to read and write and speak, even speak Greek to some level. And then job and their education and so on. So these are the very primary information that you like to ask about a character. But sometimes it is not given. When it is not given, you do what we call educated guess. Then, next question we like to ask and address when we are focusing on who of the character or who of the story, the narrative, is he or she the character, a major character or minor character or so. So when you're writing a story or when you're reading a story, when you're watching a movie or drama, there's always so-called the main character or characters, one or two, the major character who leads and who's the center of the episode and the story. So that would be the one your decision that you want to make as you read the story, and it doesn't take that much guess or complexity to determine whether this person is a major character or not. So that's a kind of easy thing. Next one would be why this character, he or she, is important in the story. I mean, usually the main character, the major character is the important one. But sometimes the minor character in the gospel story, major character always is Jesus, the Christ, the Jesus from Nazareth. He's the character. He's the center of the story. But some stories rather focus on these side characters. And one of the most popular side character that appears in the gospel is Peter. You might ask why Peter is so important. Important figure or the character in 4 gospel stories. Here is the answer. Because he is one of the example, a good example of any Christian believers today. So Peter is the type of Christian character. Even though his personality may be different than yours, but the way he met Jesus and came across Jesus and learned about Jesus and how he followed and how he failed and how he was successful, how he committed himself and became a full-time kind of minister. It is like our existence as a believer today. So for that reason, I believe these 4 different writers in the gospel mentions Peter time after time throughout the history of this 3-year span of his life. So as we read this 3 years life of Peter, we will be able to identify ourselves. Meaning we can kind of overlap ourselves to his life as a believer. We go through denial, we go through doubting, we go through the testing, just like Peter tried to walk on the water, and then he denied Jesus 3 times on the night that Jesus was tried, and then he came back and then he was asked the 3 times the question of, do you love me, by Jesus, and then eventually he's asking what's going to happen to that guy or me, because we'd like to know as a believer what's going to be like at the end. And then Jesus answers him, and then you will be, arrested out of freedom, and will die for my own, for my sake. And then it happened as Jesus was prophesied. So these are the things that we can identify. The keyword is identify with Peter. So because of that, Peter was mentioned here and there in the course of his spiritual journey. And most of us do go through those steps or the stages of our spiritual journey as a believer. And then next item at the bottom, what do we learn about this person? There are many things that we kind of learn about the characters other than Jesus. I mean, Jesus is the character that we want to learn from. That's, of course, we are obligated and mandated to learn from the story and the character and the person and the ministry of Jesus, because he's the one. He's the Messiah. He's the one that we are studying. But with Jesus at the center, there are side characters, like I said. And these side characters also give us good examples and bad examples. So in the Bible, the gospel, we find good example and bad example. Good examples are the things that we want to imitate and just copy, right? But the bad examples are there so we can avoid and learn from those failures and experiences in the Bible. But unfortunately, most of us go through the same bad examples and bad experience. When we are in there, then we can reflect on these stories, the bad examples of a believer, and we can kind of use those lessons when we are in trouble. Same thing in any other stories, right? Dramas and story for children, they do have these good examples and bad examples. Same thing with the gospel. So the gospel is, in that aspect, it's nothing different. It is the same as any other stories that will try to give us the lessons. Okay, next, continuing. Okay. As you continue to study the narratives, the gospel, sometimes it does give us the information regarding who the parents are. Especially when we're studying the story of Jesus, as the Christmas is coming soon, we know so-called nativity story. Nativity story means the birth of Jesus, story of the birth of Jesus. And that story, we do know that Joseph and Mary are the mother and father of Jesus, even though that Jesus was born and he was born by the Holy Spirit, still he had this physical earthly parents, Mary and Joseph. And the Bible, the Gospel, writes in detail why Mary and Joseph were chosen. And as we study the person and character of Mary and Joseph, there are things that we can learn from both Mary and Jesus as a man and woman of God. It doesn't give us too much detail about the parenting they provide to Jesus, other than the story when he was 12, at the age of 12, they went up to Jerusalem for the Passover, and then coming back, and when it's Passover, everyone comes to Jerusalem to celebrate, and it is kind of thing it's the thing, a really big thing at the time of Jesus. And then because there's so many crowd people, and I mean him being 12 in the culture of Israel, Jewish culture, a boy when he reaches at the age of 12, he was considered to be an adult. That's when they have initiation. So, and there is a process, the testing if this boy is mature enough to be considered as an adult. And of course, Jesus passed that, even though there's no record about it, but we can say pretty soon. So, him being age of 12, they thought that Jesus is among the crowd coming back to the town of Galilee. And as they were coming back, and they eventually find out that Jesus is not with them. And they had to go back all the way to Jerusalem and find Jesus having this very, intense discussion with this adult scholars, very old, wise men. They're the Bible scholars, and that Jesus was having discussion about the scripture. So, that kind of shows us the little glimpse of how Joseph and Mary was dealing with this son of theirs, because they were told the son is the Messiah, is the one who's going to save the Israel and the world. So they are aware of who Jesus is. They were told at the beginning of Jesus' life. Yet still, they're human beings. Both parents. They probably done their best, but yet sometimes they kind of forget about him being the Messiah, and it's just their child, and so there's that dynamic, or like a kind of dilemma for them. They're raising the very Son of God, the Messiah. But at the same time, he's a child, just like any other child. He would not cause problem like what we consider the problems. But in this case, the story of Jesus in the temple discussing biblical theology, theological or doctrinal issues with his older scholars, that, in common sense, it's not, normal. It's not normal. And to raise a non-normal kid, that's something else. So, we do read this parenting thing or the story of parents. Then, what's the lineage of Jesus? That would be the one key question that you want to ask, because to be the Messiah, There's only one Messiah. So to be the Messiah, there has to be a certain condition to be met, to be fulfilled. For him to be the Messiah, and one of the key condition or the presupposition to be met for Jesus to be the Messiah is his lineage. He, the Messiah, has to be the descendant of King David. So it has to be in David's line. And as you read the book of Matthew, you'll find this the long whole chapter contributed to the lineage of Jesus. He was born who bear who and who bear who, and it's a family tree. I mean, in today's language, it's a family tree, and it follows all the way to Jesus. So, you might ask, why this long family tree in the story of Jesus of Nazareth? And then the answer is because it is very important for especially the Jewish people to verify, to prove that this person, the Jesus of Nazareth, is indeed in the lineage of the king. So that would be the one key question that you want to study and learn. Then next item, what is his or her major role, especially regarding Jesus? So other than Jesus, when you just exclude Jesus, then there are other characters surrounding him. There are priest or high priest, there are Roman ruler, and then there's that king, Herod, and then there are these how we call it, the Pharisees, a kind of a group of a religious kind of denomination today who have a very unique doctrine. And then there is another group called Sadducees. Also, it's a religious, also plus political kind of a party or the group. And Sadducees, Pharisees, majority of the priests and the lawyers, these are the ones who study the law. These people were against Jesus. So when these people are mentioned, you have to kind of look at them and then look at what are the roles. Eventually, these are the ones who accused Jesus of trying to be the king. And it was revolt against Roman Empire, and it was a revolt against the religious leadership of the time. So it's like a double jeopardy. You're in trouble in twofold times, a double trouble. So when that happens, the dilemma is who's going to punish Jesus? Do you want to punish him in political terms or in religious terms? That was a dilemma, kind of, tug of war between these Jewish religious leaders against this Roman political leaders. So eventually, these religious leaders the Jewish leaders were smart enough to give the stone or to give the responsibility to the prelate, the Roman ruler, the political ruler of the time. So these, you need to understand the dynamics among these characters. And also, if we, another example might be the Iscariot Judah. He was one of the 12 disciples of Jesus. And the gospel tells us that Jesus kind of knew, not kind of knew, but he exactly knew and what the Judah is going to do. And the question would be, why then Jesus did not kick him out of the 12 and avoid being sold? Jesus knew it, and it has to happen. And he knew that he was going to be killed, and he knew he was going to be crucified. That's why he was asking God, the Father, can you remove this cup from me? And then, he also said, if it's your will, I'll take it. So he does take it. And in that kind of reflects that Jesus kind of already knew what is going to happen, and he accepted it. Because he accepted it, he did not do anything to twist or change the plan of the Father, the God. So that's, today we call that obedience. So obedience for Christian believers is that it's not about your pastor, it's not about your parents. I mean, I'm not saying that you don't need to obey your mother or father or your pastor or any leaders in church. But what I'm saying is the primary fundamental obedience in biblical term, it has to do with God the Father. So Jesus obeys that. So that's kind of lessons or principles that we are learning as we study these other characters. And all these characters, the side characters, they do have certain role, whether it's positive or negative. Those who are exercising the positive the influence or effect on the story is called protagonist in literature. And those who are against the main character or the main theme of the story is antagonist. And the gospel, it does have both protagonist and antagonist, and it kind of balances the story, and it makes the story more fun and more real. It is a real story, and any real existence, the human existence, as you know it, as you have experienced it, there are protagonists and antagonists for you as well. Only the thing that matters is that whether you're standing in the right side or the wrong side. If you're on the right side, protagonists are the good guys and the antagonists are the bad guys. But if your existence is on the wrong side or bad side, then your protagonists are the bad characters, and then your antagonists will be the good ones. So that depends on where you stand. And Jesus, we know he's on the righteous side. So those who are against Jesus, we consider them antagonists against Jesus. These are the bad guys. And because he's on the right side, Jesus is on the right side. Those who helps him, those who follows him, and those who support him are considered as protagonists. So we have kind of clear assumption about how to read these stories in the gospel. Okay. So we just mentioned this protagonist and antagonist. The next one. What is the driving motive of this character or these characters? How would you support that? The motive or motivation or inner intention. This is kind of a key thing in understanding any narrative. This is probably the most difficult part in doing a narrative study. Sometimes the motive and the intention are revealed by the author. So it is clearly written. This person. I mean, for example, Judas. He sold Jesus for the money, 30 silver coins. That's quite a large amount of money. And on the surface, it may look like that Judas sold Jesus for that much money. But as you study the gospel story, we know that would be the kind of secondary reason. He did not actually need the money. He was so depressed and disappointed because Judas, Iscariot Judas, one of the 12 disciples who betrayed Jesus, he thought and he strongly believed Jesus to be the one who's going to liberate the nation of Israel, from this colonialship or the rule of Roman Empire. Because all the people were suffering, the Jewish people were suffering in the land of Israel and the beyond, because there are many diasporas who are living outside the nation of Israel. These all things happened because of the Roman Empire. That's what the Judas believed. That's a kind of political belief, and which is true actually. They were suffering. They took 10% of their production or the earnings as a empire tax, 10%, and they also had to pay another 10% for their own nation. So 20% of their income was gone. I mean, it's automatic. But it didn't end there, because these tax collectors, they charge you the twice of that 20% at the time. So your tax is 40% average at the time of Jesus for Jewish people. So you go crazy. I mean, think of today's, if you're living in America, they take like almost 20% of your income. If you're single and if you didn't buy a house, and if you're living by yourself, and then independent tax report, it's almost 20% or above. It's quite a lot for even today's standard. And that take away 40%. They were mad about it. They believed it's because of Roman Empire. And they were also against these religious leaders and the political leaders of the Israel as well. So they really wanted liberation, independence from Roman Empire. And Judas believed strongly in that, and then he was very disappointed by Jesus, saying, Jesus clearly told his disciple, including Judas, my nation, my kingdom is not like the kingdom on earth. Wow. So eventually Judas understood what Jesus meant. He interpreted, okay, this Jesus that I followed as the Messiah. The Messiah, the liberator, the political new king is not going to be the king after all. So he had wasted 3 years for nothing. And he was mad, he was angry, he was disappointed, he wanted to have a revenge. So the motive, the true motive of this Judas was hatred, the anger against his teacher. That's why he betrayed him. The silver coin, 30 silver coins are kind of bonus, extra. And he could justify himself. Okay, you wasted my 3 years. This is considering all these 3 years for nothing, this is not much. And he was glad to have this 30 talents of the silver coins as the reward for betraying and helping to arrest Jesus. So the motive of each character, or these characters, are very key to understanding the gospel story. It is not only applied to the gospel story, it is true in your existence on this earth. Our existence, if you look at yourself, your own self, we do have this hidden motive. Sometimes you are aware of that hidden motive yourself. Sometimes you don't even you yourself don't realize this hidden motive. It is more dangerous, right? And studying and learning about these characters, their motives and hidden motives, helps us to analyze our own evil motives underlying in our existence. And it is pretty difficult to realize that I am a bad guy. You always try to be a good guy, and you want to be shown yourself as a good guy to others. And it is a pretty difficult thing to recognize yourself or admit yourself as a bad person. But indeed, the Bible tells us, and it kind of verifies us as we look at ourselves deeply the inside. We do have this bad motive, evil motive in us. And you find the same evil motive among these characters, even those look like a good guys. And when you're evil, you're not always evil. That's not the case. We are evil from time to time. And those time to time, it does validate us to be labeled as evil. We need to admit that. So one thing that we learn from the Bible story and the story of gospel, other than Jesus, we find out every human being, every character does have this evil side or weaker side, and we can identify with these characters. Okay, let's take a short break and we'll come back. Okay, we are back and let's continue the second part of week number 9. Okay, next. Where? So the place, the location of the story may, not always, but may have very significant hints or the clues in understanding the narrative, the theme, and so on. So it is important to also address another W. Where of a character? What are the geographical names mentioned? So first, when you read the story, sometimes it gives the location, and sometimes the location is another chapter prior to the particular passage that you are reading. In any case, you want to find out what this geographical location or place is as you study the narrative. So try to identify the place, the location, or sometimes it does have particular geographical names. In the story of Jesus, it does usually give that reference to the location, whether it's Capernaum, whether it's in the Sea of Galilee, or whether it's in the town of Nazareth, or in Jerusalem, or sometimes it happens in the land of Samaria. When these things happen, outside of the Jewish territory, then you would have some significance. For example, when the story happens in the land of Samaria, when Jesus is there, that means Jesus went there with certain intention. Because usually the Jewish people, the Jews, do not go into the land of Samaria. That's like, today, it's not the exact comparison, but since we have the war between the Israel and Palestine, the Hamas. The Palestine, they are the kind of a cousin to Jewish people. They are related. And as we go back in the Old Testament, they are part of family. And they were divided, and then later more divided because of their religious belief, other than ethnic relationship. It's like today's North Korea and South Korea. We are same ethnic group, same family, use the same language, but because of the political belief, or ideological differences, we are divided to north and south. So the Sumerians, and the Jewish had a different ethnic kind of composition or the blood. They say Jews are the pure blood, and the Samaritans are those who have married outside Jewish people. If the Jewish man married to another Gentile, and then they are considered, the children are considered to be Jews. But if a Jewish woman is married to a Gentile man, and then they have children, these are called Samaritans, mixed, not pure blood. So they were not accepted in Jewish community, or they don't have Jewish citizenship. So they had to live outside the land of Jews. And they kind of designate a certain neighborhood area for these people who are mixed, and the fathers are Gentile, but the mothers are Jews. So they are kind of social outcasts, and they were considered second citizen. These Samaritans could come and serve as servants in the Jewish community, but they did not have any legal rights or ethnic rights as Jews have. So when Jesus is entered the land of Samaria, it's kind of like a forbidden region to enter. It's like an Israelite today going into Palestinian land. And I mean, you can guess what's going to happen. So Jesus is kind of taking the risk. He's not taking the risk of being killed. I mean, it's not that. But it is considered forbidden because these Samaritans are not pure. And if you're the Messiah, you want to keep yourself as clean as possible. That's what the people are expecting. But Jesus chose to ignore that expectation and go into Samaritan land, and even had a conversation with this woman who's been married, not officially married, but lived with 5 different men, which tells this Israelite she is morally a failure. And he carries out a conversation with this woman and even asks for the water to be given. That's something no decent Jewish man would do. And he does. Jesus does that. So the land of Samaria, talking with the Samaritan woman who's morally kind of failure, that's something no to Jewish people. And the gospel proudly and explicitly records that very incident that Jesus went into the land of Samaria and had a conversation with this immoral woman. And it's not only in the one gospel, it's in 2 different other gospels as well. So then also Jesus goes into Capernaum and other cities where majority of people are Gentiles. Gentiles are even worse than, not worse than, but they were considered also unclean. And Jesus goes there and even spends days and days among these Gentiles, which is also considered taboo or no for a Jewish people. So, even that is the case, the gospel was intentionally, the authors intentionally gives the name of the locations where Jesus went into, which will be a finger kind of pointing thing for any religious leader. So I think, no good priest or the scribe or Pharisees will go into these Gentile cities or the Samaritan territory as much as possible. They will avoid it. But Jesus willingly and intentionally goes there. So these geographical names and the locations, it does have very significant hint to the understanding of the story and then the person and character of Jesus. That's why this where kind of thing is important in understanding the character of Jesus or the life of Jesus and the work of Jesus. Then the second point, where did this gospel character live? What the community or the area is like? I kind of mentioned that before, but let's just go over again for the sake of understanding the significance of the residency of a person. It applies to the woman in Samaria, but Jesus, he lived in around the Lake of Galilee in the town of Nazareth. I told you that the town of Nazareth is a ghetto where the poorest of the whole community kind of gathered together doing the fishery and some other low task works. To the Jewish standard, I think we find very similar kind of concept to Korean and the Asian, most like a Chinese the culture. They considered the hand users to be the top, and the hand users at the lowest strata of the structure. We have, in Korea, we have four, in Joseon Dynasty, had 4 different levels of social strata. And doing the business or handwork were considered to be the lowest. Same thing in the Jewish culture. And this Jesus lived in that kind of lowest strata level community, which means he was not educated, probably had a very primary minimal education, was able to read and write, but that was all. He didn't go to any, like today's middle school or high school or college. He didn't. And so are the other disciples. So that means all these disciples plus Jesus, there are no excellent scholars or the writers or learned people, just regular people, even lower than average kind of people. So that has kind of significance for us today. You don't need to be a very educated to be a believer, or has to have wealth, rich to be a believer. That's no condition. So anyone is considered to be a good believer in Christian context. then what is the name of the place and the meaning of it? All the locations, just like in us in Asian culture, each city or the town, the place or the area does have the names. Of course they do, but these names have certain meanings to it. And those meanings sometimes, not always, but most of the time is associated with the story itself. So that is significant to know the name of place. And then in the gospel story, especially those places mentioned around in and around the Jerusalem, they do have the names, the meanings. And Jerusalem also is the city of God, Jerusalem, which reflects how people were expecting this town to be, or how symbolic this town, the Jerusalem, is. And Jesus had to enter the city of God, the Jerusalem, before he died or he was killed. So the entering of Jesus on the week of his death, with the people welcoming and shouting Hosanna, is very significant. It did happen historically, and even whether these people were welcoming Jesus with real sincerity or not, they shouted Hosanna, the praise of the King, as the word or the praise that were used to welcome and receive the King, just like in Korea we say 만만세 to the King. So it was the same thing for these people. When they say Hosanna, they were receiving the King or a King. So the Jerusalem is significant, the city of God, and Jesus, the Messiah, the King, must enter the city of God to be the King, or inaugurate as the King. And that was the event of inauguration, a very symbolic inauguration. Even though he was riding a donkey, still that kind of formalized the entrance to the city of God to be the King, or godly King, or King for the kingdom of God. So that's very significant, the name of the place, as you study the gospel and the person and character of Jesus. Then again, where? Continuing on this theme of where, out of 7W1H. Okay. What impact did the locality have on the life of the character we study? We already explained that in the case of Jesus. He was born and lived and raised in the town of Nazareth, which is kind of ghetto kind of community. Then the second point, is there anything notable or important significance given about this location and area? The same thing. We already. Then, is there any other characters or episode related to this location? In the gospel story, some of the things that will happen in the locations that were mentioned in the Old Testament. For example, the story of Jesus coming across this Samaritan woman in the very heat of the day to draw water from the well. And the name of that well was given, and it's called Jacob's well. Jacob's well that appears in a couple thousand years prior to this story of Jesus. When Jacob was, he inherited this well from his ancestors, which means that he is considered or authorized to be the right owner of that land, which also means it's the proper heir or the inheritant, the person who inherits. It's the proper heir of the line of the Jesus, or the line of the king, or line of the Messiah. So the Jacob was, Esau and Jacob, actually the Esau was the first son, is the proper person to inherit. But he was denied of that right because he sold his right to his younger brother. They were twins, but this is the younger one, and gave that right to Jacob. So there could be a very debate about his proper right, but as he was given this well and the land, he was authorized or officially acknowledged as the right heir or right person to inherit the inheritance. In Jewish culture, just like in Korean culture, I think it's the same in Chinese culture, the right of inheritance is the really big thing. It's one of the major, how do you call it? Authority, or the position that one can have in that culture. So to have that the property land also means he is the one who has that honor of being the firstborn. So even though Esau was physically the firstborn, spiritually speaking and legally speaking, Esau is no longer the right person. He's not the first son or firstborn. So as we go to that episode about the Jacob's well, these people, Samaritans, are living in the very proper land, actually the proper land, and that was validated and authorized for the line of the Messiah. But they were kind of rejected or considered as to be the second citizen. So there is that paradox, kind of very paradox, and the dilemma, contradiction, because they are the ones who are occupying the proper land. That's why this woman said, we are the right inheritance. And she says, where is the proper place to worship? Is it Jerusalem or is it our land? So there's that background. So without understanding that background story in the Old Testament and the significance of Jacob's well, you may not relate her question about the proper place to worship when she asked Jesus, because she considered him to be at least the good teacher. And Jesus said, it's not the place, It's not the place. It's your heart. So you have to worship God with the truth and then sincerity. So that's how Jesus answered. So there is these significance to the location that appear in the Old Testament and then again in the New Testament. And even with the Gospels, there are places that are mentioned again and again. The Jerusalem is the one, Capernaum is the one, and then the Sea of Galilee is the one, and then River of Jordan, that is another one that mentioned in different episodes. And the River of Jordan is like the significant place for the salvation. That's why John the Baptist were baptizing the people in the River of Jordan. Even today, we have this hymn, having crossing the Jordan River, meaning you're crossing from this life to the next life. So this River of Jordan, it's not really river to our standard. Us, Koreans and Chinese, we know the river need to be pretty big. But this is, in our standard, it's just a creek. It's not that big, a river. So where, if you go to Israel today and you visit the place where John the Baptist baptized people, it's just a small creek. A little deep, but it's not that wide. So anyway, this River of Jordan, is very significant in the biblical context or biblical story. And then next, is there any other significant stories related to the place and where thinking? Okay, then when? In the Bible, as much as the place is, does it have key reference and significance, the time element, this time, it does have a very, very significant connotation or the meaning that is associated with. So when the story in the narrative, when it mentions the time, it is very important. As you read Genesis, if you're familiar with the Genesis, it says God created this and this and that, and then it was evening and then morning. You may read it very lightly. Even believers, Christians, don't give much significance to that evening and the morning. But as you study Bible, if you become more understanding to the contents of Bible, the evening and morning is not just the evening and morning as we consider it chronological, but it does have a very significant. So in the Bible, there are two kind of two Greek words are used to reflect the time in the Bible. One is kairos, and the other one is chrono. Chrono is a scientific time. No significant meaning that were associated with it. An hour is an hour, 1 minute is 1 minute, a day is a day. But when they use the word kairos, it's translated as time in English in both sense. And in Korean, this will be the that. That means it does have some nuance to, it does have certain, kind of associated with the meaning of time, right? So kairos is more like a day in Korean. This is a shiga or shigan in Korean. So kairos is the time that has certain significance, whether it's a spiritual, whether it's political, whether it's personal. It's a time that has certain meaning. And in the life, in our existence, we do have both. Some of the time that we experience is like a kairos. For example, when you're taking, just a couple of days ago, we had the college entrance exam thing in Korea, right? I mean, in Japan, Korea, China, in us in Far Eastern culture, it's very important time. That's the kairos. You either you make to the college, university, or you don't, depending on that exam. So that time is not just normal, regular, any kind of time. It does have significance. So is the marriage. So is the birth of your first child. And so is the death of your loved ones. These are like a kairos time. As we read the Bible, we do find not all, but some of the time that mentioned are very significant as kairos rather than chrono. Having said, let's go into these items. When did they live? Okay. You can go into the days and weeks and months, but in general, that era, we know, I mean, this is limited when we're doing the gospel study, it's year 0 to year 30 something, right? Because Jesus lived that much. Year 0, that's when we say BC and AD, that means before Christ, and Anno Domini means after the Christ. So that is the dividing line, and so we consider Jesus probably lived about 33 years old, and so that's when that happened. And what had happened prior and after? That would be the key in understanding most of the stories and episodes and narratives. It's not only in the Bible, in the Gospel, but in our story, in our existence. What happened before will determine what's happening today. And what's happening today to my life, or to the community, or to the world today will affect and change, or sometimes determine the life that's going to happen in the future. For example, the corona, COVID, that's before and after, right? Before COVID and after COVID, and we live in the post-COVID era, which significantly changed our way of living, the existence. People try to go back to pre-COVID era, some does, but we know that's not possible, it's impossible. We cannot reverse the time. So what happened before and what happens now and what happens in the future? Same thing. As you read the story, even if it's happened in the past, when we read a particular story or study particular episode, we consider that to be the present, and then what happened prior to that is the past, and what happens after that particular story we would consider the future event. So we want to make a kind of in line of these three different segments of episode as a time processes. So each time, each when will have certain effect and relationship to each segment, and we try to figure out what had changed, what's the difference between the story before and after, and why certain transformation or change occurred. And if that is a personal change, not the condition or surrounding or the context or reality, but when it happens to the person, psychological, physical, and social, and cultural, and spiritual transformation and change before and now and after, that's what we're trying to read. And it happens to Jesus. For example, Jesus before the resurrection and then after the resurrection. That's totally different character and person. And the disciples before the resurrection, up to the point of Jesus being crucified, when he was killed. And then right after his resurrection, they witnessed it. They saw Jesus resurrected, and they are totally different personality and character after Jesus' resurrection. So we do read this significant change, and when you see that, the student and the academic person as a student will ask, why did that change happen? And we try to find out or pinpoint the reasons and the cause of these changes. And that will help us to understand the person of Jesus and the mission of Jesus. The mission of Jesus was, of course, to change these disciples from before the resurrection and then after the resurrection. Jesus wanted to see them to be the disciples that were changed after the resurrection. And as we read and study, what we do from that story is to imply and apply those change to my personal and your personal existence. If that existence doesn't change, even after reading and studying all these things and finding the principles and facts and lessons, then it's just a lesson. It's just a lesson. It doesn't have any spiritual effect to your life. Sadly, this is the many of the case. It's probably the common among the believers today. They do come to church and sit there every Sunday, listen to the preaching of the pastor about 30 minutes an hour, and they are entertained. Probably psychologically, yes. But were they changed spiritually? Spiritually means whole person. Your thoughts, your mind, your emotion, and your desire to change, and then actual change should happen. That's a spiritual in my understanding. Not religious, not supernatural. That's not how I define or how the Bible defines spiritual. Spiritual is whole person. That's what spiritual means. So whole person has to change, and it has to be carried out into your reality. And if it does not happen, it's only stops there in your knowledge, and that's just knowledge. It could be a good ideology, or it could be just a good religious practice. Religious thoughts, but it's not a belief. A belief is that you identify yourself with Jesus and his intention and his desire and his plan. And we want to see that change, certain, definite, clear change in our lives. Then, next point, what other events were going on in the time of the events? Sometimes you not only read the gospel itself, but try to see what had happened in the time of Jesus in history, outside Jerusalem, outside Israel. And you'll find there are certain connection to it. Continuing on the theme of when did the episode happen? What time of the day? That sometimes, let's try to get an example of the story of Nicodemus. Nicodemus, he came to see and visit Jesus in person. He was hearing all these reports because he's the leader of Sanhedrin. The thing called Sanhedrin was both sociocultural and religious leadership of the community. The political and then the military power was given to Romans, and they were under Roman rule, and they were the colony of Roman Empire. So they didn't have this political power, but Sanhedrin still kept. They did have political power, but they gave it away, and just remained to be their religious, their leadership. And it also deals with the socio-cultural matters. And because of that, Nicodemus, being the one of these 33 or 30 plus leaders in that group of leadership, the committee or the Senate or of today, he was getting all these reports about Jesus. Because they all, like today, they had a kind of intelligent network. And they were always sensitive to what's happening among the people. So he was hearing that. And there are good reports and there are bad reports. There are negative and there are positive reports. So eventually, him being very neutral and open-minded, Nicodemus, he decided to investigate himself rather than hearing from other people or other priests or other leaders. So he comes to see Jesus, but he had chosen to be in the late night, in the late evening. Why would he do that? And even if he was courageous enough to meet Jesus in person, to make that determination about this character and the person and the work of Jesus, he was also considering the others who may criticize him coming to see Jesus with his own will. No one asked or ordered for him to come and see Jesus. So he was kind of was, he didn't want to be visible. So that's why he decided to come at night. So when it reports that this Nicodemus came to see Jesus at the night. And he asked this very question, how can I be born again? Because as soon as Jesus see this Nicodemus, Jesus knew what his question was. And then directly says, you have to be born again to enter the kingdom. To go to heaven, in other words. He thought, being a Jew and being one of the top 1%, probably 0.1% of the whole population, there are only 30 of them. So top of the top, the point of this pyramid, he had never doubted until he hears about this Jesus, who's claiming that I'm the way, I'm the truth, I'm the life, and said, without through me, you will not go to see the Father God. So, I'm sure that Nicodemus heard that report, claiming that he's the only way to heaven. So he was puzzled, and he asked himself, what if that is true? You wouldn't be afraid. You're thinking all the way through your life. Probably he was in his 50s or 60s, and he was thinking, when I die, I'll be in heaven with the Yahweh God. And there's one guy suddenly saying, that's not the case. You have to believe in the Son of God, the Messiah, to go to heaven. If he didn't knew that, then he wasn't probably puzzled. But now he's troubled, and he wanted to make sure that he enters the heaven, because it's the ultimate thing for any Jewish person to be with Yahweh after this life. So he kind of have decided to make that risk, and still he comes at night and asks that question. So what time of the day will be sometimes very important in understanding the dynamic of the story. Okay. Next, what is historical background and significance of the time? In the Bible, in the Gospel, there are several, quite a few mention of the time, the season called Passover, or the Sabbath. Passover, to understand the significance of that season, you have to go back, way back, to the time of Moses, when they were coming out of Egypt, leading 2 million people out of Egypt. It's a big thing. It's a very historical event for both Egyptians and for Jews, and of course for Moses. And God tells Moses, tell your people to sacrifice a lamb and take the blood from that lamb and paint your door frame with that blood. Unless you do that, anyone in that household, the firstborn who is a boy will be killed. And that's the day of Passover. They are kind of remembering, not particularly celebrating, but remembering that day when God had saved Israel and the firstborn of Israel from the slaughter or the judgment. So that's a very significant event for Jewish people regarding the salvation of God. So the day of Passover is a day of salvation. They remember that day and kind of commemorate and relearn and remind themselves about the plan of God, the salvation of God, the protection of God, and so on. So that's the day of Passover. And why do they think it's a big day? It's like today's the lunar New Year, and then we have the full moon celebration and so on. So it's very significant for understanding the particular season and the time in the historical background. Okay, I think time's up for today, and this will conclude the week number 9. And thank you for listening, and thank you for coming, and I will see you guys next week, which is the last week. And thank you again.